They tried to humiliate a black girl. In the courtroom, black mother said, "The black nation, the black family, everyone keeps oppressing them, looking at them with disdain and contempt. We are human too, do not treat us with cruelty." He thought money could erase black girl. All eyes in the courtroom were on her, and they looked at her like she is black girl and black girl didn't belong, until her mother showed them exactly who they were dealing with. Mother said, "We are black family, why we are crying, where is justice?" All eyes in the courtroom were on her, and they looked at her like she didn't belong, like she had no right to be there. Joy Matthews felt it in every stare, every whisper that slithered across the polished oak benches, the kind of judgment that cut deeper than words ever could. For a moment, she froze in the doorway, the heavy swing of the doors behind her marking the threshold between the life she had known and the hell she was about to walk through. She had arrived alone. Bank accounts frozen, credit cards cancelled, her friends gone as if they had never existed, erased by the man who was supposed to be her partner, her husband, her ally, Victor Matthews. Her name echoed faintly through the marble hall, carried by the murmurs of strangers and the pointed glances of people who thought they understood the story before they even heard it. Victor sat at the front, smug in his tailored suit, a thin smirk playing across his face. He exuded power, wealth, and a confidence that made the walls of the courtroom feel smaller, more suffocating. He had already spoken to the judge earlier, casting doubt on her intelligence, her capacity to fight back, claiming she lacked the credibility and integrity to challenge someone like him. "Your Honor," Victor had said, "my wife is incapable of even hiring a lawyer. She is, at best, a woman desperate to create chaos where none exists." Joy's heart had thudded in her chest at that moment, a sharp, painful beat of disbelief. He thought he had won. He thought stripping her of financial resources, isolating her socially, and publicly mocking her would make her disappear quietly. But Victor had made one mistake, one critical mistake that would cost him more than money or reputation. It was a mistake that involved underestimating the power of family. The gallery of observers shifted uneasily as Joy walked toward the center of the room. She could feel the stares, heavy with contempt and doubt, and the subtle undertone of racial bias. Being black in this courtroom was another layer of struggle. Whispers floated through the air like smoke, questions unspoken yet audible to anyone paying attention. Can she really do this? Does she even belong here? Joy knew their thoughts because she had lived under their gaze her entire life. The subtle, insidious assumptions that black women were less capable, less deserving. Today, in this room, she had every intention of proving them wrong. Not quietly, not politely. She would stand tall. She would be seen. Victor noticed her hesitation and laughed, a low, cruel sound that echoed against the high ceiling. "Do you even know what you're doing here?" he sneered, his words dripping with condescension. "This court is for serious people, Joy. You clearly are not one of them." The judge, a stern woman with a piercing gaze, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Courts were not meant to be arenas for public spectacle, but this was shaping up to be one anyway. Victor had brought every ounce of his wealth, every line of his legal team's strategy to make sure Joy appeared powerless. Joy swallowed hard, feeling the weight of centuries of prejudice pressing on her shoulders. She thought of her mother, Evelyn, a woman of unyielding strength, someone who had taught her that dignity and power were not given, they were claimed, defended, and when necessary, taken. Evelyn had warned her about men like Victor, about institutions that didn't see black women as equal participants in justice. Her gaze hardened. She would not back down, she could not. "I may not have your money, Victor," she said quietly, but with enough force for the room to hear. "But I have something you never will, the truth." Victor's smirk faltered, a twitch of irritation crossing his face. He was accustomed to control, accustomed to fear and compliance. Joy, standing there in a simple black dress that spoke more of her determination than her finances, was a disruption. The court clerk called the session to order, and the first witnesses began to speak. Victor had expected Joy to crumble under the pressure of their testimonies, to falter when faced with legal minutiae and public scrutiny. But each name called, each claim made, she met with calm, precise responses, her voice steady, her facts checked and undeniable. And then he did it, the move he thought would break her. Victor leaned forward, his tone scornful. "Your Honor, my wife is not just ill-prepared, she is foolish. She has made claims without evidence, and I fear her inability to comprehend legal processes will waste the court's time. She is, quite frankly, a spectacle of incompetence." Laughter rippled through a few of the spectators, thin, mocking, patronizing. Some of it wasn't even conscious. It was the kind of reaction trained into people who saw black women daring to assert themselves in spaces where bias told them they didn't belong. Joy's stomach churned, but she did not falter. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when the world thought she was alone, powerless, invisible. And just as the tension reached its peak, as Victor leaned back with the smug satisfaction of a man who thought the court was in his hands, the doors swung open. A hush fell over the courtroom, every head turned, every eye widened. Evelyn Matthews walked in, tall, formidable, her presence filling the room in a way that no wealth or title could. She wore a look that said she had seen injustice, she had seen betrayal, and she had not come to negotiate. Victor's smirk vanished, replaced by a frozen, slack-jawed expression that spoke of pure terror. He had forgotten to consider her mother. "Mom," Joy whispered, almost in disbelief, but there was no fear in her voice. Only a quiet, simmering power that had been passed down through generations. Evelyn's eyes swept the courtroom like a storm. The murmurs of the audience grew louder. People sensed the shift, the weight of a woman who had spent her life commanding respect and refusing to bow to oppression. Victor tried to speak, tried to assert control, but no words came. The arrogance that had carried him this far was being stripped away, layer by layer, by the presence of someone he had never considered a threat. Someone whose love for her daughter was a force beyond any legal strategy. And so, in that room, filled with whispers of doubt, undercurrents of racial bias, and centuries of injustice, the first cracks appeared in Victor's carefully constructed world. The kind of cracks that would widen, that would shatter, that would change everything. Joy felt a rush of emotions, relief, vindication, and a deep, unwavering resolve. Today was not just about her. It was about every black woman who had been underestimated, every person who had been silenced, every injustice that had been ignored. The courtroom was about to witness something no one would forget. The courtroom fell silent as Evelyn Matthews's presence filled the space. Every eye was drawn to her, every whisper died midair, and even the judge paused, momentarily caught off guard by the force of her entrance. She didn't rush to the front. She walked slowly, deliberately, letting the weight of each step remind everyone present that she was a force to be reckoned with. Victor Matthews sat frozen, his confidence unraveling with every click of Evelyn's heels against the polished floor. The smirk he had worn like armor all morning had melted into something unrecognizable. Fear. A deep, instinctual fear that had nothing to do with the law and everything to do with a woman who had long learned how to dismantle men like him. "Evelyn Matthews," the judge finally said, her voice calm but firm, "do you have business here?" Evelyn didn't flinch. Her voice, low but resonant, carried across the courtroom. "I am here for my daughter, and I am here to make sure the truth is seen." A few murmurs rippled through the spectators. There was something almost electric in the way she spoke. This was not a timid mother. This was a woman who had lived through injustice, who had seen the subtle ways black people were disregarded and humiliated, and who would not allow her daughter to be another victim. Victor opened his mouth, attempting to regain control. "Your Honor," she. "Sit down, Victor," Evelyn interrupted, her tone sharp, slicing through his defenses. "You've said enough. You've humiliated my daughter, tried to erase her from existence, and now you're about to face what you refused to consider, accountability." The gallery gasped. Some leaned forward, sensing that the balance of power had shifted. The whispers that had hovered like shadows were replaced by a tangible tension. Everyone in that room could feel it. Joy watched her mother approach and felt a swell of pride. She had always known that Evelyn's love was fierce, but seeing it in action, seeing the sheer command her presence invoked, was empowering. She straightened her shoulders, matching her mother's gaze with quiet determination. Together, they were a wall of strength Victor had never anticipated. Victor's legal team exchanged nervous glances. They had prepared for her daughter, yes, but Evelyn Matthews was a different story. She was more than a witness, more than a participant. She was the embodiment of a lifetime of lessons, of resilience, of intelligence honed under pressure and prejudice. "You see, Your Honor," Evelyn continued, addressing the judge now, "my daughter has been stripped of her finances, her social connections, and her dignity. Not because of her actions, but because she dared to assert herself in a world that too often judges black women as less than, as incapable, as unworthy of respect." The courtroom stirred. People shifted in their seats. Some were uncomfortable, some were intrigued. Some, who had perhaps never witnessed such an unapologetic confrontation of racial injustice, were stunned. Victor's face reddened. He opened his mouth again. "Your Honor, this—" "Silence," Evelyn cut him off again. "You have humiliated her publicly. You have painted her as foolish in front of strangers who cannot see past their own biases. But I will not allow that to continue." The gallery was silent now, hanging on her every word. Joy could feel the weight of the room, the collective anticipation of a verdict not yet given, but shifting. The story Victor had crafted for himself, a story where he was untouchable, where wealth equaled power, was unraveling. "Let's talk facts," Evelyn said, pulling a file from a leather satchel she had carried. "Let's talk evidence. Let's talk about what truly happened before my daughter was left in financial ruin and emotional distress." She laid out documents with precision. Contracts, bank statements, emails, everything Victor had hoped would remain buried. Each paper she handed to the court clerk, each copy submitted to the judge, was a nail in the coffin of his arrogance. "My daughter," Evelyn said, her voice steady, "did not ask for wealth, did not ask for lavish gifts, did not ask to be controlled. She asked for fairness, for respect, and for the truth to be acknowledged." Victor's smugness faltered with every revelation. A witness called earlier, who had been coached to misrepresent Joy's actions, now hesitated under the mother's commanding presence. The subtle racial bias that had been guiding assumptions in the room began to crack under the pressure of evidence and the undeniable dignity with which Evelyn presented it. "And let us not forget," she continued, looking directly at Victor, "that black women in this country, in every court, in every office, are too often judged more harshly, scrutinized more deeply, and presumed guilty more quickly than anyone else. You assumed my daughter's skin color, her gender, her supposed inexperience would be enough to silence her. You were wrong." Victor's jaw tightened. He leaned back, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. He had thought he had bought influence, respect, fear, but there was no check for power like a mother's fury combined with truth. Joy felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. This was not about emotion, this was about witnessing justice. Not just her justice, but the justice of every black woman who had been diminished, dismissed, and disregarded simply for being who she was. The courtroom shifted again as Evelyn began cross-examining Victor's witnesses. Her voice was precise, sharp, and commanding. She exposed inconsistencies, contradictions, and deliberate attempts to misrepresent facts. Each misstep by the witnesses made Victor squirm. Each admission of the truth added weight to her argument. And then came the moment that made Victor visibly shake. Evelyn produced an email he had sent, a message intended to intimidate Joy, to strip her of agency, to make her compliant. The email, read aloud in court, revealed his manipulations and his assumptions about her ability to fight back. The room fell silent. Some of Victor's supporters shifted uncomfortably, some were incredulous. How could someone so meticulous, so wealthy, so confident, have been caught so completely off guard? "This," Evelyn said, holding up the email, "is the face of entitlement, of arrogance, and of prejudice. And today it will not stand." Joy felt a surge of pride, but also relief. Relief that she was not alone, that her mother's presence, strength, and intellect had amplified her own voice. Relief that the narrative Victor had tried to control was being dismantled piece by piece. The judge, who had remained composed throughout, finally spoke. "I must admit, the evidence presented today is compelling. The court must consider the totality of these actions and the context in which they occurred. Victor's face drained of color. His carefully constructed plan to humiliate, to control, and to dominate had been shattered. For the first time, he realized that wealth alone could not shield him from truth, from accountability, from the raw, undeniable force of a woman defending her child and the integrity of justice. Evelyn looked at her daughter, a small, almost imperceptible nod of solidarity passing between them. Joy had survived the first wave of Victor's attacks. She had stood, strong and unbowed, in the face of personal humiliation and systemic bias. But this was only the beginning. Outside, whispers of the courtroom drama would soon spread like wildfire. Within, Victor was learning a lesson that money and manipulation could never teach. You cannot underestimate the power of a black mother's love and a black daughter's resilience. The courtroom was electric. A palpable tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating, as though every eye in the room was waiting for the inevitable eruption. Victor Matthews had spent his life believing that money, status, and privilege could shield him from consequences. He had built a life on intimidation, on exploiting systemic biases, and on assuming that a black woman's voice would never carry weight in the halls of power. Today, he was about to be proven wrong. Joy Matthews stood beside her mother, Evelyn, her posture strong, her face calm but resolute. Every whisper of doubt that had trailed her into the courtroom earlier that morning had been replaced by confidence, the confidence that comes from truth, preparation, and the unwavering support of someone who loved you fiercely. She had survived humiliation, betrayal, and the sting of systemic prejudice. Now it was time to reclaim everything that had been taken from her. Victor shifted in his seat, sweat forming at his temples. His legal team scribbled notes frantically, desperate to salvage the crumbling facade. But the tide had turned. The court had witnessed Evelyn's precision, her command of facts, and her unwavering resolve. Witnesses who had been intimidated earlier now looked nervous, hesitant, as they realized the depth of her scrutiny. "Your Honor," Evelyn said, rising once more, "we have shown that my daughter's financial accounts were unlawfully frozen, that she was intentionally isolated from her community, and that false narratives were spread to humiliate her. This was not just personal, it was systemic, and it was motivated, in part, by assumptions about who she is, a black woman with the courage to demand respect." The judge nodded slowly, acknowledging the gravity of the claims. "The court has reviewed the evidence and the testimonies. I must admit, the pattern of actions here is concerning." Victor's face contorted, anger and panic warring across his features. He had tried to erase Joy, to diminish her in front of everyone, to weaponize his wealth and status. And now, in the courtroom that had once seemed stacked in his favor, he was powerless. "Your Honor," Victor finally said, his voice shaky, "this is exaggerated." "No, Victor," Evelyn interrupted, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "What you did is not exaggerated. It is documented, it is undeniable, and it will not go unchallenged." The courtroom fell silent. Even the gallery leaned forward, sensing that the moment of reckoning had arrived. Victor's arrogance, the shield he had carried for years, was gone. In its place was vulnerability, the kind that comes when a person realizes that all their wealth and power cannot erase truth or protect them from accountability. Evelyn continued, presenting the final pieces of evidence. Detailed bank statements showing the illegal freezing of accounts, emails revealing Victor's manipulations and attempts to publicly humiliate Joy, and testimony from witnesses who confirmed his attempts to isolate and intimidate her. Each document, each statement, was like a hammer striking against the wall of lies Victor had built around himself. "And let us remember," Evelyn said, her gaze sweeping the room, "that the treatment my daughter endured is not unique. Black women across this country face assumptions, discrimination, and belittlement every day. This is a microcosm of a larger injustice, and it will not be ignored here." The judge's eyes softened with a mixture of recognition and concern. The court acknowledges the systemic issues raised and the documented evidence of misconduct. "Victor Matthews, your actions will have consequences. My decision today reflects not only the personal wrongs committed, but also the broader context of bias and injustice that cannot be ignored." Victor's hands trembled as he realized the full scope of his defeat. He had underestimated Joy, underestimated Evelyn, and underestimated the power of truth and justice. His carefully constructed world of control and intimidation had collapsed, leaving him exposed, accountable, and utterly powerless. Joy exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief, triumph, and catharsis flooding through her. She had faced humiliation, isolation, and betrayal, but she had not been broken. Not by Victor, not by systemic prejudice, not by the whispers of a society trained to doubt her worth. Today, she had reclaimed her voice, her dignity, and her life. Evelyn reached for her daughter's hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You see, Joy," she said quietly, "we are never alone, and no one can silence us when we stand together with truth as our weapon." Outside the courtroom, the story spread quickly. Social media lit up with accounts of the dramatic showdown of the black mother and daughter duo who had faced prejudice head-on and emerged victorious. The story resonated far beyond the walls of that room, inspiring countless others who had faced similar discrimination. Victor Matthews left the courthouse that day a different man. His wealth remained, but his power, his arrogance, and his sense of invincibility were gone. He had been reminded, publicly and painfully, that money cannot shield someone from the force of truth, courage, and the unwavering resolve of those who refuse to be silenced. Joy and Evelyn walked out together, heads held high. The sunlight outside seemed brighter, more hopeful. They had faced humiliation, systemic bias, and betrayal, and they had emerged stronger, more empowered, and more determined than ever. For Joy, this was not just a personal victory, it was a statement to the world. Black women are strong, black families are resilient, and injustice, no matter how deeply entrenched, can be confronted and overcome. As they left the courthouse, journalists clamored for interviews, onlookers whispered in awe, and the whispers of doubt that had followed Joy for so long finally fell silent. The courtroom drama that had begun with humiliation and betrayal had ended with empowerment, justice, and undeniable triumph. In the end, it was not wealth, influence, or arrogance that prevailed. It was truth, love, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her daughter. And for Victor Matthews, that was a lesson he would never forget.